Chapter 2443. Little Hachi bit her lip and turned around. Who wants to thank him? He's not done with his lies. But when she saw Chu Liuyue's calm face, she suddenly remembered something. Wait, if Yan Qing is the divine general of the left, then who is the Holy Sun? Little Hachi's mind went blank. Then an extremely shocking guess appeared in her mind. Yan Qing has only had one master since the beginning. That means, Little Hachi suddenly opened her eyes wide and was dumbfounded. No way? She looked at Chu Liyue, then at Yan Qing, and finally at Chu Liyue. Her heart sank. It seems to be true, Chu Liyue turned his head and raised his eyebrows slightly, as if urging her. Little Hachi grabbed Mu Hongyu's hand and looked at her secretly. Mu Hongyu gave her a look. Don't worry about other things now. It's more important to save your life. Little Hachi's forehead twitched, and she finally stammered. Thank you, Brother Yanqing. Divine General of the Left. Chu Liyue looked away with satisfaction and said to Yan Qing. Thank you for today's matter. Also, our little Hachi has a willful personality and always speaks her mind. If she offended you before, I hope you don't mind. Yan Qing's Adam's apple moved, and he felt like he was being roasted on fire. That gaze was very light, but for some reason, it felt heavy when it fell on him. He paused and said with difficulty, No. At this moment, there was a commotion outside the door. Following that, two figures appeared one after another. Sorry. I was really delayed by something. I'm not late, right? This voice was very familiar. Chu Liyue looked up. Two familiar faces came into view. The one following behind him was a scoundrel. The man who was one step ahead of him was walking over with a smile on his face. He had an eager expression on his face and was holding an account book in his hand. As if sensing her gaze, the man stopped in his tracks and looked over. Chu Liuyue's lips slowly curled into a smile. Second Master Yan, how have you been? The corner of Yan Ji's mouth twitched. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Yan Qing standing in front of Chu Liyue and immediately felt more confident. He waved his hand and forced a smile. What a coincidence. Chu Liyue scanned him from head to toe. Are you feeling better today? Yan Gu was on the verge of tears. All right. It's all healed. He walked as if he was flying. That's good. Chu Liyue's tone was indifferent. This conversation was extremely strange, causing everyone who heard it to be dumbfounded. Su Li asked curiously, Little you know this second master? Seeing that Ming Shu was following behind him, he must be the second master of Zhenbao Pavilion. But didn't she always say that this second master's health was not good, so she had never seen him before? But this, you can say that. Chu Liyue's words were vague. Su Li and the rest were even more puzzled. It was obvious that they were very familiar with each other, but why did their words sound a little off? Chu Liyue looked at Xu. Lord Zhui, if you had told me earlier, I could have reunited with Second Master Yan earlier. If there was more time, we could have sat down and reminisced. Zhui's heart skipped a beat. This was not something he could decide. In fact, he had already urged him many times. But if the person above did not agree, how could he dare to do anything? Zhui was bitter in his heart. He looked at Yan Gu for help. Yan Gu gave him a kick. Exactly. Why didn't you say so earlier? Zhui? Mu Hongyu also looked at Yan Gu in shock. She pointed at him with a trembling finger. Back then, Yan Gu didn't seem to have told him everything. But Yan Gu couldn't care less about this now. He wiped his sweat. Well, if there's nothing else I'll go over first. I still have the account books with me. I'll let them use them later. They is, of course, referring to the divine envoys. Chu Liyue laughed. I have no right to ask what Second Master Yan wants to do. Please do as you wish. Yan Ji's heart trembled. Then he looked at Yan Qing and gave him a look that said, Good luck to you. He secretly rejoiced in his heart. Luckily, Yan Qing was one step ahead of him. With such a scapegoat, he should be able to die a more dignified death. Thinking of this, Yan Gu coughed. Then I'll leave. As soon as he finished speaking, he had already left. That silhouette inexplicably revealed a sorry figure of someone fleeing in defeat. Ming Shu also hurried to catch up. There seemed to be a strong murderous aura here. The divine general of the left was more powerful. It was better to let him bear it alone. In the blink of an eye, he also hurried to catch up with Jianghu. Chu Luiyue looked at Yan Qing again and smiled. Why isn't the divine general of the left saying anything? Everyone is still waiting for you. Yan Qing's lips moved. But in the end he swallowed the rest of his words and turned around. He waved his sword. Shu Jing let out a muffled groan. His body was wrapped by an invisible force and dragged out of the celestial physician competition area. Behind her, there was a long trail of blood. It was a ghastly sight. Because her pearl of essence had been shattered, she had no strength left. She could only collapse on the ground, barely breathing. Seeing this scene, who would have thought that she was still the proud and honorable 8th divine envoy 15 minutes ago? But no one pitied her. Her previous actions had clearly crossed everyone's bottom line. So at this moment, everyone only had disgust and ridicule for her. Such a person was indeed not qualified to be the 8th divine envoy. Moreover, her pearl of essence had been shattered. She was completely useless now. In a place like the illusory god palace, this was definitely more painful than killing a person directly. Yan Qing's gaze swept across her body without any ripples. Then, he looked at the celestial physician competition area. He raised the tip of his sword. Continue. Shu Jing had already fallen to such a state. The situation in the celestial physician competition area had become a little tricky. However, little Hachi had already succeeded. It could be considered as a benchmark for them. Jian Fengqi looked at Yan Qing a few times. Then, he looked up at the main hall of the illusory god palace and Mu Qinghe, who was standing on the steps. For a moment, his thoughts were churning and his mood was complicated. Yan Qing was the divine general of the left. Compared to him, the fact that Mu Qinghe was the first god's emissary didn't seem as shocking and surprising. Taking a deep breath, he finally focused and continued to refine the pill in front of him. This world was too complicated. It was more important for him to save his own life first. Everything seemed to be back on track. The life and death competition continued. There was silence all around. The atmosphere was very subtle. Chu Luiyue saw that Jian Fengqi was about to finish. He tilted his head and asked in an emotionless voice, "Divine General of the Left, where is your master?" Digression, around 1 o'clock. Chapter 2444. Yan Qing's body tensed up instantly. He held his breath and felt his throat dry up. That simple sentence was like a knife hanging over his head, ready to fall at any moment. It made him tremble with fear. He was about to speak when he heard Chu Luiyue laugh again. "Oh, I almost forgot. He asked me to wait for him at the illusory god palace." Yan Qing swallowed the words in his throat with difficulty. The surrounding air seemed to be particularly cold, almost squeezing his internal organs together, making it difficult for him to breathe. He had never felt that time was so difficult to pass. "Then I'll wait." Chu Luiyue tucked his hair behind his back and said casually. Yan Qing gripped the hilt of his sword tightly, his back drenched in sweat. The strange atmosphere here also attracted the attention of many people. Yu Qian and the others looked over, their minds in a mess. The Yan Qing that little Hachi called Brother Yan Qing was the divine general of the left. But wasn't there a rumor that he came from the divine ruins world? And he seemed to be following someone else. A strong sense of uneasiness welled up in the hearts of the divine envoys. Jin Yunlai couldn't help but say, "What exactly? Cough, cough, sorry for being late." Before she could finish, Yengu had already walked over quickly with Zhui. He had never been on good terms with these people. In the past, when they met, he didn't give them any face. But now, his attitude was surprisingly good, and he even had a warm smile on his face. He almost couldn't wait to get to where the crowd was and squeezed his way through. "Make way, cough, please make way." Fan Yunxiao's brows were tightly knitted together. "Second master, why are you squeezing? Isn't there space all around us?" Yengu looked at him with resentment. "What do you know? Why don't I find a place to hide first? What if I get splashed with blood later?" It's easy for you to say that. I'm happy to. It's none of your business. Fan Yunxiao. She had thought that Yan Ji's temper would improve after not seeing him for so long, but he was still as bad as before. Furthermore, he seemed to be even more arrogant than before. Of course, Fan Yunxiao did not know that a person would not be in a good mood when faced with a life-and-death situation. Seeing Yan go like this, Fan Yunxiao was very annoyed, but she couldn't flare up. After all, the other party had the account book in his hand, and his identity was not to be trifled with. He fiercely waved his sleeves, but could only give up. After being interrupted by Yan Ge, the rest of the divine envoys were also distracted. Although he had doubts in his heart, he couldn't ask too many questions in this situation. Time passed extremely slowly. Finally, the pill in Jian Fengqi's medicine cauldron was finished. The pill shot up into the sky. Jian Fengqi's figure moved, and he leaped up as he effortlessly kept the pill. Click. The pill was placed into a jade box. He landed lightly on the ground and weighed the jade box in his hand. A smile appeared on his handsome face. It's finally done. Seeing this, Mu Hongyu patted her chest lightly and heaved a sigh of relief. Little Hachi glanced at her and pursed her red lips. Little Hongyu, why are you so nervous? With the divine general of the left here, can he really die in a life-or-death situation? Mu Hongyu. She sneaked a glance at Yan Qing. His face was expressionless as usual. She didn't know if it was an illusion, but she felt that the aura around Yan Qing seemed to have become colder. That? Little Hachi, isn't it inappropriate to say this? Mu Hongyu said with some hesitation. It's inappropriate. Chu Liwei suddenly added, his eyes indifferent. The divine general of the left has always been fair and upright. How could he be so biased? Yan Qing's eyelids twitched. Mu Hongyu's eyes darted, and she inexplicably touched her fingers with a guilty conscience. She seemed to have said something wrong. Chu Liwei suddenly glanced sideways at Yan Ge from afar. Seeing that he had tried his best to hide his plump body behind the oracles, she narrowed her eyes slightly. Then, she suddenly raised the corner of her lips. Second Master Yan's health does seem to have improved a lot. Don't you think so, Divine General of the Left? Yan Qing clenched his teeth and finally managed to squeeze out a few words. His body has always been very healthy. Chu Liwei raised his eyebrows. Oh, is that so? In the distance, Yan Ge, who had been listening attentively, almost jumped on the spot when he heard this. This kid. What nonsense is he talking about? Don't drag others down with you. Zhao glanced at him and advised in a low voice. Second Master, I think you should lie down. What was there to think about at this point? Yan Ge took a deep breath and regretted it. He came too early. Mr. Su. Chu Liwei suddenly looked at Su Li. Su Li was stunned. What's wrong? Chu Liwei smiled slightly. Nothing. I just suddenly remembered that you haven't seen Senior Tang Ku for a long time, right? Su Li nodded blankly. Is there a problem? Not really. It's just that. I think he came with Divine General of the Left? Chu Liwei said calmly. As soon as he finished speaking, Tang Ku, who had just arrived at the gate of the palace of the illusory god, suddenly stopped in his tracks. He began to seriously consider whether to continue going in or turn around and leave. Before he could make a decision, he heard Yan Qing's cold and emotionless voice from inside. He's just outside. Tang Ku. Chu Liwei seemed to have sensed something and looked over. Tang Ku smiled awkwardly. Chu Liwei said, Tang Ku is the person Mr. Su wants to see. The person I'm waiting for is not here yet. Chapter 2445. Murderous intent overflowed. Su Li glanced at Tang Ku silently. Little Hachi rubbed her waist, thinking about how to run away more conveniently later. Shangguan Jing took a deep breath and covered his face. The Divine General of the Left. Lord Yan Qing, his desire to live is really strong. Xiao Ran was confused. What's wrong? What's wrong? The atmosphere suddenly became very dangerous. On the other side, Tang Ku braced himself and walked in. When Ruan Jianfeng saw him, his expression changed slightly. Lord Tang Ku, long time no see. How have you been? Tang Ke's eyes twitched, and he wanted to shut Wan Jianfeng's mouth immediately. What are you shouting for? Are you familiar with me? A stiff smile appeared at the corner of his mouth with difficulty. Good, good. After that, he quickly left. Wan Jianfeng looked back strangely. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but why did he feel that Tang Ke's expression was not right? However, this thought just flashed through his mind. Just as he was about to withdraw his gaze, he suddenly froze. Tang Ke didn't go to the side of the divine emissaries, but went to the other side? I'm late. While Tang Ke was speaking insincerely, she came to Su Li under the scrutiny of several people. He took out a palm-sized jade box and handed it over. Lizi, this is a gift for you. Su Li didn't take it, but looked at him strangely, and then looked at Yan Qing. At this time, if she still couldn't figure out what was going on, she would have lived for so many years in vain. Lord Tang Ke, why are you so polite? She said. Tang Ke's eyebrows twitched, and he cursed Wan Jianfeng again in his heart. He was under a lot of pressure now. One from Su Li, the other from Chu Luiwei. Mr. Su, this is also Tang Kedaren's goodwill. You should accept it. Chu Luiwei said gently. Su Li snorted but still didn't move. Lord Tang Ke is very familiar with the fifth divine emissary. No wonder he was not in a hurry to enter the palace of the illusory god. Tang Ke licked her lips, not knowing what to say. At this moment, Chu Luiwei asked Yan Qing softly, as if they were chatting. I wonder what Senior Tang Ke's identity is? Please tell us in detail so that we won't offend you again. Instead of asking Tang Ke, she asked Yan Qing. Tang Ke turned to Yan Qing for help. Make your words more beautiful. The number 1 refiner of the illusory god palace. Yan Qing spat out a few words expressionlessly. Tang Ke? I knew I shouldn't have counted on you. Oh, Chu Luiwei said with understanding. The last syllable was slightly drawn out as he smiled thoughtfully. No wonder. Senior Tang Ke's strength was extraordinary. Indeed, it was not something a mortal could compare to. Tang Ke coughed. It's nothing. I just occasionally repair some miscellaneous items. Chu Luiwei suddenly thought of something as she stared at Tang Ke, and her gaze stopped on him for a long time. Tang Ke felt goosebumps all over her body. She was still holding the jade box in her hand and felt very awkward. What's wrong? Is there something wrong? Chu Luiwei looked at Su Li and asked. Mr. Su, you said that Senior Tang Ke set the location of the duel at the Peach Blossom Dock? She was talking about the duel between the two 10,000 years ago. Su Li was startled and nodded. Chu Luiwei narrowed her eyes. That duel was of great significance to the Peach Blossom Dock. It almost reshaped the cultivation environment of the Peach Blossom Dock. And it was also at that time that the armillary shield suddenly appeared and helped the two of them make the 10 sacred artifacts. Chu Luiwei's gaze swept across Tang Ke's face, and something seemed to flash across her mind. But when she wanted to grab it, it disappeared. Tang Ke's throat was dry and she forced a smile. Su Li said, Since Lord Tang Ke is so honorable, you should go and stay with the divine envoys. Tang Ke was speechless. He felt very conflicted. On one hand, he wanted to escape from this Azura field and save his life. On the other hand, he knew that if he really left, it would not be so easy to stand in front of Su Li again. After thinking about it, he finally gritted his teeth and said, No need. I'm fine with staying here. Yan Ge saw this scene from afar and clicked his tongue. Look, this is what happens when you lose your freedom. Isn't it better to be alone? At least at this critical moment, you have a chance to breathe. Seeing Yan Ge's unconcealable pride and joy, Ming Shu rubbed his face hard. Second Master seemed to have forgotten that there was still that person above them. Which one of them could escape? Jian Fengqi walked out of the competition area and headed here. Suddenly, his footsteps paused, and a trace of astonishment appeared on his handsome face. Why is everyone here all of a sudden? Yan Qing aside, the divine general of the left had to come. Why was Tang Ke here too? He was focused on refining pills and did not notice the situation outside, so he was still in a daze. Mu Hongyu grabbed his wrist and pulled him over. Jian Fengqi looked down and glanced at the fair and soft hand that was grabbing him tightly. He raised his eyebrows and could not help but smile. He leaned over, lowered his voice, and asked with a smile, "Hong, are you so worried about me?" She still said that she did not care about him. Look at how tightly she held on to him after surviving a life-and-death situation. Would she be like this if she did not care about him? Mu Hongyu looked at him as if he was an idiot and said faintly, "Isn't that so? It was not easy to survive a life-and-death situation. Wouldn't it be a pity if he died somewhere else?" Before Jian Fengqi could feel happy, he heard her say again, "Stop talking." Jian Fengqi vaguely felt that something was wrong. But when he saw Mu Hongyu's serious face, he opened his folding fan and whispered into her ear, "I'll do whatever you say." Mu Hongyu's ears heated up and felt a little ticklish. She subconsciously rubbed her ears and glared at him. Why was he still thinking about this at a time like this? Jian Fengqi was dazzled by her bright, almond-shaped eyes. His last bit of intelligence and rationality flew away. It was not that there were no benefits to surviving a life-and-death situation. Look, someone's attitude changed so obviously. Feeling Jian Fengqi's reaction, Mu Hongyu held her forehead helplessly. It was hopeless. Time passed slowly. The competitions in the 4 competition zones were also proceeding in an orderly manner. Perhaps because of the commotion earlier, the Celestial Physician competition ended first. Except for Little Hachi and Jian Fengqi, only 2 other people successfully passed the competition. As for the rest, including Liang He, they all failed. Almost immediately after the competition ended, these people were surrounded by several streams of light that flew out from the competition area. Their souls were destroyed. Chapter 2446. Looking at this scene, Chu Liwei suddenly said, "This life-and-death juncture is really dangerous. Doesn't the Imperial Emperor feel that it's a pity to lose so many experts every time?" Her voice was very soft, but Yan Qing heard it clearly. He paused for a moment and explained, "This is the Divine Palace's trial. This is the trial of the illusory God Palace. If there are no accidents, the Emperor will not interfere." The reason why he advanced in advance this time was because Xu Jing had secretly tampered with it and destroyed the fairness of the life-and-death juncture. But in fact, these things were mainly the responsibility of the Divine Palace. Chu Luiwen narrowed her eyes and then smiled. "I see. It seems that I really don't know much about the Imperial Emperor." Yan Qing. In fact, he wanted to explain a little, but this was really not the right time. Moreover, he had always been a man of few words and was not used to doing such things. It would be better. If his master could come in person, it would be best. Of course, this was very rare. Therefore, Yan Qing chose to remain silent again. The remaining 3 competition areas were gradually coming to an end. Just as expected, there were very few who succeeded. Chu Luiwei looked forward calmly, but there seemed to be waves in her eyes. Countless images appeared in her mind one after another. Yaochen, Tianling, Divine Ruins World, north and south of the sea, past and future. It turned out that everything was under his control. In the past, she had always felt that meeting Rong Xiu was the greatest blessing in her life. However, now she realized that it was not a coincidence that they met. Everything that happened after that should have been carried out according to his plan, right? Chu Luiwei pursed her lips slightly. She had long known that this man's thoughts were extremely deep, but she had never thought that he was the one who had spent the most effort on her. He was the Imperial Emperor, so why did he have to do this for her? Chu Luiwei couldn't understand. She raised her eyes slightly and looked at the main hall of the Divine Palace. On the steps, Mu Qinghe stood with his hands behind his back. His expression was as indifferent and cold as ever. Did he know about this? She didn't know why, but she suddenly remembered what Xiao Ran had said before. He said that there were a total of 13 divine envoys in the Divine Palace. Senior Xiao Ran. Chu Luiwei looked at Xiao Ran. "There's something I want to ask." This sentence instantly broke the silence. The silence. Everyone in the surroundings unconsciously looked over. Xiao Ran immediately said, "Eh." Chu Luiwei paused and her voice was calm. "Why are there 13 divine envoys in the Divine Palace?" Xiao Ran was stunned for a moment before he answered subconsciously. This is naturally because there were 13 envoys in the past. Inside the room, Lu Feng was standing in front of a huge sand table, carrying out the final touches on a few of them. Beside her Chao. For 3 days, Yen and Yu and the time. Li Weita. Because he hadn't been able to rest, Lu Feng's eyes were bloodshot. Fortunately, his mind was always focused, and his movements were still very precise. Suddenly, he paused and looked at one of the mountains with a slight frown. How high should this be? Xin Yi reported a number. Lu Feng immediately began to repair the small mountain, trying his best to make it perfect. After tidying it up and confirming that it was correct, he heaved a sigh of relief. This sand table was very particular. There couldn't be the slightest mistake. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but look up at Xin Yi. He had built this sand table according to the map his big brother had given him, so he knew that his big brother was very familiar with everything on it. But after 3 days, he was still deeply shocked. Big brother's understanding of these things could no longer be explained by the word familiar. Every mountain, every river, every house, every tile, there was nothing he didn't know. Even if he had personally measured it with his feet, it would be difficult for him to do this, right? But big brother, Lu Feng didn't dare to ask any more questions and continued to work. In fact, he also had huge questions about himself. Because building this sand table seemed to be getting easier and easier for him. When he first saw the map his big brother had provided and asked him to build it within 3 days, although he agreed quickly, he refused in his heart. After all, he was very clear about his own strength. But things seemed to be gradually developing in an unexpected direction. Many times he didn't even need to recall the map to be able to perfect the sand table bit by bit. Furthermore, his movements were skilled. It didn't seem like it was his first time at all. It was as if he naturally knew where the water should flow, where the mountains should gather, and where they should spread. Thus, he swallowed all his questions back into his stomach. Lu Feng retracted his gaze and finished the last part of the repairs. Finally, he let out a long breath. Big brother, it's done. How about you take a look? Xin Yi nodded. Very good. He had been guarding here the entire time and knew every bit of the sand table very well. He didn't need to look any more to know that there was no problem. Only then did Lu Feng relax and chuckle. It was rare to hear his big brother praise him. Step back. Xin Yi suddenly said. Okay. Lu Feng didn't understand what was going on, but he still obediently took 2 steps back. Then he saw Xin Yi make his move. A pale green stream of light flew out from his palm and landed lightly on a certain spot on the sand table. At the same time, a huge barrier silently appeared on Herb Mountain. Chapter 2447. In the Palace of the Illusory God. Shu Jing suddenly sensed something. She raised her head and looked in the direction of Herb Mountain. Panic flashed through her heart. She immediately struggled to get up. However, her pearl of essence had been shattered. She was severely injured and had no strength left. It was difficult for her to do something as simple as standing up on her own. Even the wound on her lower abdomen was torn open again because of this. Intense pain surged through her body. She bit her lips tightly and forced herself to swallow the taste of blood that filled her mouth. She turned around and looked at Mu Qinghe as she said weakly, I'm sorry. Now, it was obvious that she couldn't do anything with her own strength. She had to find someone else. The first oracle, Mu Qinghe, was her best choice right now. Sensing the commotion, many people in the palace of the illusory god looked over with different expressions. First oracle. I have. Shu Jing spoke very slowly. Yan Qing had not held back at all in that strike. It had completely shattered her pearl of origin and even left behind an extremely serious injury on her body. So now, she was hanging on by her last breath. What does she want to do now? Little Hachi narrowed her eyes when she saw this scene from the corner of her eye. Is she asking the first oracle for help? She and Shu Jing didn't get along well. Coupled with the previous incident, she hated Shu Jing even more now. Therefore, when she saw Shu Jing speak, she subconsciously thought that she was up to something again. Mu Hongyu glanced at her and said, I don't think so. If Mu, first oracle, wanted to help her, she would have done it earlier. Why would she wait until now? Since Mu Qinghe had said in public that she would leave everything to Yan Qing, she shouldn't interfere anymore. Otherwise, wouldn't she be slapping herself in the face? Moreover, Xu Jing was not only useless now, but she had also become a stain on the palace of the illusory god. Mu Qinghe and the others didn't even have time to draw a line with her, let alone help her. Little 8 nodded in agreement, seemingly deep in thought. Then what is she trying to do? Mu Qinghe also looked at Xu Jing. His eyes were as cold as ever, without a trace of emotion. He looked at Xu Jing as if he was looking at an object that had nothing to do with him. Herb Mountain. Xu Jing spat out these 2 words with difficulty. He dragged his crippled body forward slowly. The ground beneath her was already stained with a large patch of blood. It was a ghastly sight. Mu Qinghe frowned slightly. Right at this moment, Yan Qing suddenly attacked. A long sword pierced through the air. The terrifying sword energy instantly enveloped Xu Jing. In the next moment, the sword pierced through Xu Jing's calf and nailed her to the ground. She cried out in pain and almost fainted. Yan Qing's voice was cold. Who allowed you to leave? There was dead silence all around. Many people looked at each other. This, strictly speaking, Xu Jing didn't leave, right? All she did was move a little bit. However, since Yan Qing said so, the others naturally couldn't refute. Some people couldn't stand it anymore and couldn't help but look at Mu Qinghe. However, he didn't move or say anything. It seemed that he was indifferent. Fan Yunxiao frowned and finally said in a low voice, Xu Jing has been the 8th divine envoy for so many years. She looked after the Herb Mountain and refined pills. Even if she didn't get any credit, she still worked hard. The first divine envoy is so indifferent. Really? Yu Qian's expression was a little cold. Yunxiao, be careful with your words. She has made a big mistake. She was indeed too bold to do anything at the critical moment of life and death. What's more, she did this just to take the opportunity to take revenge on little Hachi. She was simply brainless. Fan Yunxiao moved her mouth. If it weren't for the divine general of the left and little Hachi, before she could finish speaking, she was met with Yu Qian's warning eyes. She finally swallowed the rest of her words. The rest of the people looked at each other. In fact, Xu Jing wasn't so impulsive and brainless in the past. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to sit in the position of the 8th divine envoy for so many years. The key was that she had some feelings for the divine general of the left. How could she withstand these provocations? No wonder she lost control for a moment and did so many stupid things. Yu Qian glanced at Xu Jing. She's still thinking about the Herb Mountain at this time. She doesn't know that from now on, all of this has nothing to do with her. Now, he only hoped that Xu Jing's matter wouldn't implicate the palace of the illusory god in them. Fan Yunxiao heard this and could only sigh helplessly. When Xu Jing heard this, she felt the blood in her chest and abdomen surging. She wanted to talk about the barrier of the Herb Mountain. But these people... Xu Jing finally spat out a mouthful of blood, fell to the ground, and fainted. Actually, Yu Qian and the others couldn't be blamed for this matter. They were so indifferent because on one hand, Xu Jing had done something wrong and couldn't be saved. On the other hand, she had been too obsessed with controlling the Herb Mountain all these years. When people heard her mention the Herb Mountain, they subconsciously thought that she still had other thoughts about it. There were many reasons that led to this situation. In the end, she could only blame herself. Chu Liuyue's gaze lingered on Xu Jing for a long time. She seemed to be looking at her, but also seemed to be thinking about something. Little Hachi saw her like this and pursed her red lips slightly. She reached out to take her hand. Master, why are you always looking at her? What was there to look at when she was already sentenced to death? Chu Liuyue came back to her senses and tilted her head to look at little Hachi. Her eyes were pitch black and calm, but there seemed to be an unfathomable undercurrent in the depths of her eyes. Little Hachi suddenly froze and touched her face. Master, why are you looking at me like that? Was there something on her face? Chu Liuyue shook her head. Nothing. I just suddenly remembered that in the life and death situation just now, your performance was excellent. You even beat Shu Jing by a bit. 80's beautiful eyes blinked lightly as a wisp of a charming and complacent smile appeared on her face. Of course, I'm Master's woman. Of course I'm better than her. Chu Liwei seemed to have thought of something as her lips curved up. In the room, Xin Yi was still moving. Lu Feng stood to the side, holding her breath and concentrating. After the faint green light appeared, it began to drift in all directions with Xin Yi's movements. Silently, it covered all the mountains and clear streams on the sand table. Chapter 2448. Time passed slowly. After saying those words to little Hachi, Chu Liwei did not speak again. She just looked ahead quietly. After the Celestial Physician competition ended, the martial artist competition also came to an end. Compared to the other competition areas, the number of people here was the highest. But the competition was still very fierce. About 100 venerables challenged Mu Dongyu one by one, but only 8 people successfully passed. After it was over, Mu Dongyu turned around and left the competition area. The 8 venerables also walked out one after another. They were more or less injured and looked miserable. But compared to those who had died in the life and death juncture, they were obviously very good. Seeing this scene, Xiao Ran's eyes turned slightly. He glanced at Chu Liwei and could not help but shake his head. Sigh, what a pity, her subordinates were all very promising. Such a good opportunity, but they missed it just like that. Chu Liwei, of course, heard what he said. However, she did not seem to care very much about it. She just frowned slightly and smiled slightly. Seeing this, Xiao Ran had already guessed her attitude, so he swallowed the rest of his words. Compared to other things, she probably cared more about the lives of her subordinates. It was great to be able to ascend to the heavens and become a venerables, but they also needed to have the strength and luck. Besides, many people around her, including herself, had already entered the final round. Thinking of this, Xiao Ran stopped thinking and did not say anything more. The Tianlei in the Chaos Holy Jade was quickly consumed. Several craftsmen were focused on forging divine artifacts, crazily snatching the power of the Tianlei. Unfortunately, until the end, no one could successfully forge a divine artifact. Only 2 of the blacksmiths managed to win the competition with their outstanding venerable artifact and obtained the qualification in the end. The number of craftsmen is indeed the lowest. Su Li murmured softly. This was the type of cultivation that had the highest requirement for talent. Mu Hongyu asked curiously, Mr. Su, if the Tianlei was still open as usual, would the situation be better? Su Li shook her head. Although it will have some impact, the first divine messenger has already sent enough power of Tianlei into the Holy Chaos Jade. So, overall it will not affect the craftsmen during the life and death juncture. Mu Hongyu nodded in understanding. I see. I thought that since they were so close to the chaotic Holy Jade, they might be able to increase the possibility of refining a saint artifact. Xiao Ran laughed. That's difficult. Now that the chaotic Holy Jade was incomplete, it would be extremely difficult for him to break through to become a crafting saint. Without that talent, it's impossible to do it even if you stand inside the primal chaos Holy Jade. Mu Hongyu asked subconsciously, what if the Holy Jade of Chaos returns to its original state? Wouldn't it be easier? Logically speaking, yes, but how could it be that easy? Xiao Ran clicked his tongue. The Holy Primal Chaos Jade has been missing for tens of thousands of years. For many years, the illusory God Palace has been looking for the missing piece in the middle, but there has been no news. Probably, there was still no chance. Hearing this, Mu Hongyu was stunned for a moment and unconsciously looked at Chu Liwei. The surrounding people also became more and more quiet. They had all seen Chu Liwei's globe shield. Without a doubt, that was the missing piece of the Holy Jade of Chaos. It was just that. For some reason, Chu Liwei had been in the illusory God Palace for so long, but there was still no sign of the globe shield being returned. Su Li frowned slightly. She still remembered the scene in the Red Moon Desert clearly. As soon as Chu Liwei stepped into the illusory God Palace, a tyrannical force suddenly erupted from the Holy Jade of Chaos, trying to snatch her globe shield. But now, when she really came to the illusory god palace, nothing happened. Suddenly, Chu Luiyue seemed to feel something and looked in a certain direction. Phoenix Mountain. Clusters of red and gold flames burned silently on the mountain. Dumpling sat cross-legged with her eyes closed. Those flames contained astonishing power and constantly surged toward her body. And the aura on her body was also constantly rising. In front of her, the two-Tian baby had already grown 8 leaves and was gently swaying in the wind. Dumpling's cute little face was now suffused with a thin layer of red. Dull pain came from all over her body. Beads of sweat kept appearing on her forehead, but they were quickly burned away. She had a strong premonition in her heart. The 8th meridian should be opening soon. Finally, the last person in the Mystic Master competition also stopped. Jin Yunlai let out a long breath. Even though he was the 7th divine envoy, it was still very tiring to test so many people at once. Unexpectedly, the number of Mystic Masters who passed the life and death trial was higher than expected. There were a total of 6 people. Yu Qian frowned slightly and looked at Fan Yunxiao. Didn't you say that there would be about 3 people who would pass smoothly? Why are there suddenly 3 more now? 3 people didn't sound like a lot, but it was actually very significant. This was the number of Mystic Masters who passed the life and death trial, and it was twice as many as expected. Fan Yunxiao's expression wasn't very good either. Isn't it simple? Before this, there were 3 people who successfully completed the Star Road and comprehended all the mystic formations on it. Yen Gu suddenly sneered from the side. These people have spent a lot of effort on the Xian formations in the Heaven Scroll some time ago. Why, you don't know this? Chapter 2449. His words made the faces of Yu Qian and the others even gloomier. To a certain extent, Yen Gu knew more about these matters than them. As divine envoys, this made them feel rather embarrassed. Fan Yunxiao laughed coldly. Second Master Yen is in charge of Zhenbao Pavilion and is very well informed. Who has a few trump cards in their hands and who has made progress. Everything is under your control. We naturally can't be compared to you. Yen Gu let out a "heh" and said humbly, "You flatter me. I'm not as powerful as the 3rd divine envoy says. Besides, it's very tiring to check the accounts every day. How can I compare to the 3rd divine envoy? Other than the year of opening the gate of heaven, you've been very carefree." Fan Yunxiao's face turned slightly green, and the veins on her forehead throbbed. This Yen Gu, he's really too much. Isn't he just relying on, if Second Master Yen feels tired, you can assign these tasks to others? Fan Yunxiao took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in her heart. For example, that account book? Yen Gu blinked. Account book? You mean the one that the first master asked us to manage? Fan Yunxiao choked and swallowed the rest of her words. That's right. The precious treasure pavilion belonged to that person. On the surface, it was a business, but in reality, it was just one of the methods that person used to supervise the illusory god palace. Even though they were divine envoys, they had no right to interfere. Yen Gu had already said this. How could he continue? Fan Yunxiao clenched her fists and looked elsewhere. Out of sight, out of mind. At this moment, a melodious sound of a bell came from above. Dong! This sound of the bell carried a shocking pressure and spread across the sky above the illusory god palace. Everyone's heart trembled as they looked in the direction of the sound of the bell. The person who had rung the bell was Mu Qinghe. Following the sound of the bell was his cold and indifferent voice. Those who have passed the life and death stage enter the palace. Enter the palace. Naturally, the main palace of the illusory god palace. Upon hearing this, Chu Luiyue narrowed his eyes. Following this, the tightly shut door behind Mu Qinghe finally opened. Bang! In an instant, an invisible, vast pressure gushed out from the main palace like a river. Chu Luiyue's heart trembled. Almost at the same time, the 3 water droplets that had been silent for a long time in his dantian began to fluctuate violently. An indescribably strong summoning force came from within, echoing from afar. Her heart began to beat rapidly, and even the blood in her body seemed to be boiling. As the second divine emissary, Yu Qian took the lead and walked up the stairs towards the main palace. Following closely behind were several other oracles. When they all went up, the ones who followed closely behind were Jun Jiuqing and Nanjin Shu. Seeing this scene, many people were shocked. Chu Luiwen narrowed his eyes. She knew that Jun Jiuqing and Nanjin Shu were not ordinary people, but she did not expect them to be ranked so high. As if sensing her gaze, Jun Jiuqing, who had just stepped onto the stairs, suddenly turned around and glanced at her. That glance was unfathomable and unpredictable. Before Chu Luiwen could figure it out, Jun Jiuqing had already turned around and stepped into the main palace. Su Li said, "Little Yu, let's go too." Chu Luiwen did not move, but looked at Yan Qing instead. "Left Divine General, why don't you go ahead first?" No expression could be seen on Yan Qing's handsome and cold face. "The Emperor is about to arrive. We will wait here." Digression, Con, just a little bit less today. This side was not easy to see. She had imagined many scenarios, but as for which one, she would only know at the moment when she wrote it. Ahem. But soon. Very soon. Chapter 2450. Chu Luiwen blinked, and her lips seemed to curl up into a faint smile. Okay. With that, she turned and left without hesitation, heading toward the main hall of the illusory god palace. Su Li and the others followed behind her. Little Hachi glanced at Yan Qing from head to toe. Yan Qing seemed to sense it and looked over. No emotion could be seen on his handsome face. Little Hachi snorted. "Looks like I can't call him Brother Yan Qing anymore. What if I offend the Divine General of the left?" Yan Qing's heart skipped a beat. However, before he could say anything, Lil 8 had already taken a step forward and walked forward. "Master, seventh brother, wait for me." As she spoke, she clutched her injured waist and followed him with small steps. Her steps were hurried, and her long pleated skirt fluttered in the wind. Occasionally, there would be the crisp sound of broken jade beads colliding with each other. Chi Han slowed down and turned his head to ask in a low voice, "Is your injury serious?" Little Hachi came to his side. She tilted her waist and lifted up the broken jade beads. A corner of the bruise on her slender waist could be seen clearly. Although he had used medicine, it was still a ghastly sight. Chi Han frowned and helplessly pulled her hand to put down the broken jade beads. "How can you do this in public?" Little Hachi snorted. She was carefree and didn't care much about these things. On the other hand, the other members of the 13U army would correct her every time they met her. Little Hachi held Chi Han's arm. "Seventh brother, let me lean on you for a while." Every step she took hurt badly. Chi Han was about to ask why she didn't let Mu Hongyu continue to help when he saw Jian Fengqi standing beside Mu Hongyu. Looking at his posture, he really didn't intend to let her go. "Chi Han." He stretched out his arm to support Little 8, and they walked forward just like that. Suddenly, he felt a cold gaze sweep over him from behind. He instinctively turned around and met Yan Qing's gaze. The two of them looked at each other for a moment. Yan Qing was the first to withdraw her gaze. Chi Han pretended that nothing had happened. He narrowed his eyes slightly and led Little Hachi forward. After a while, their voices could be heard in low voices. "Don't be so close to anyone in the future. Otherwise, you'll be deceived and won't even know it." Little Hachi pouted. "Got it. You and the left Divine General? It's fake." Fifth brother and the others misunderstood. Little Hachi stomped her feet. "I wanted to tell you guys for a long time, but I never had the chance. Do you understand now?" However, he had never imagined that it would be in such a manner. Yan Qing's eyelids drooped slightly, and her jaw tensed slightly. Chu Luiwen stepped onto the stairs. Step by step, she walked steadily, even though she had seen an illusion in the Red Moon Desert and entered it before. However, a fake was a fake after all. At this moment, stepping on the stairs felt heavy and real. This was the real, illusory god palace. She stepped onto the last step and took a deep breath. Then, she raised her eyes and looked ahead. The door of the main palace was wide open. It was majestic and sacred, The 3 water droplets in her dantian were fluctuating wildly at this moment. Her expression was calm as she forcibly suppressed this movement. Then, she turned her gaze slightly and looked at Mu Qinghe beside her. Actually, this was the first time she looked at him seriously after so long. Previously, in the illusory god sea, the seawater was surging and the light was dim, so she couldn't see clearly. Moreover, she was deeply shocked at that time and didn't have time to care about anything else. Now that she saw him again, she had calmed down. The sun was just right now, and his appearance was clearly reflected in her eyes. His facial features were exactly the same as before, but his temperament had changed a lot. Even looking at him made people feel that he was very different from before. It even seemed like there were 2 people. In the end, he was the first divine envoy, Chu Liyue silently said in her heart. Mu Qinghe's eyes were indifferent, without any ripples. The 2's eyes met for a moment. Chu Liyue smiled, turned around, and stepped into the main palace. The main palace of the illusory god palace was actually the same as what she had seen in the Red Moon Desert. The circular cylindrical palace was tall and majestic. There were grooves all around, each of which had light balls of different colors and sizes. Looking up, there was a brilliant dome. Vast pressures surged from all directions, entangling and swallowing people. Yu Qian and the others who had come in before were now standing side by side in the innermost position of the main palace. Chu Liyue randomly chose a place to stand. Compared to the other cultivators who had come in with great difficulty, her appearance was too plain. Su Li looked around and frowned slightly. It was exactly the same as what she had seen in the Red Moon Desert. Actually, those who had been to the Red Moon Desert and entered the illusion would definitely be as shocked as Su Li when they came here. However, other than them, no one else had successfully entered this place, so this matter didn't cause too much of a reaction. Most of the cultivators were surprised and amazed, mainly because this was the main palace of the illusory god palace, the holy land that they had yearned for so long and finally arrived at. After everyone had entered, Mu Qinghe finally walked in as well. When the divine emissaries saw her, they all bowed respectfully. Chu Liyue also looked over. At this moment, Mu Qinghe came to the center of the main palace. She cupped her fists. "First divine emissary Mu Qinghe, please appear." Everyone quieted down and looked at her nervously and excitedly. Is the divine master going to appear? One had to know that the divine master didn't usually appear. It was extremely difficult for even the divine emissaries in the illusory god palace to meet him. Now, on the eve of many cultivators ascending to the heavens and becoming gods, he was finally going to appear. How could everyone not be excited and curious? Everyone's eyes were focused on the position in front of Mu Qinghe. After a moment, a silver and red light slowly appeared in front of everyone. The starry light was so dazzling that it was almost impossible to look at it directly. Seeing this scene, Chu Liyue narrowed her eyes slightly. Shengguan Jing held his breath and turned to look at Chu Liyue. Her god domain was also silver-red in color. If it was a coincidence, it was too unbelievable. However, Chu Liyue's face was still calm, as if she wasn't surprised. Shengguan Jing retracted his gaze and looked again. At this moment, a black figure was faintly discernible in the ball of light. The moment this figure appeared, an incomparably powerful pressure descended at the same time. Other than the divine emissaries, the remaining cultivators' expressions changed. The divine master's power was indeed extraordinary. Just this point alone was enough to make everyone present look up to him. Chapter 2451. But soon, everyone noticed a problem. The divine master didn't seem to have any intention of revealing his true appearance. The figure was too blurry, and they couldn't even tell if the divine master was a man or a woman. Only the endless pressure made people feel reverence, and they didn't dare to look directly at it. Chu Liyue looked at it for a while, and suddenly realized something, and her brows furrowed. Then she turned to look at Mu Hongyu. At this time, Mu Hongyu also looked over. The two looked at each other. Without needing to say anything, Chu Liyue confirmed the guess in her heart. The divine master actually didn't appear in the illusory god palace, but directly enveloped a space and descended. Around the silver-red ball of light, a faint fluctuation could be felt. It was a movement caused when two spaces intertwined and collided with each other. Chu Luiwei retracted her gaze and lowered her eyes, hiding the surging waves in her eyes. This divine master was really interesting. If he wanted to come out, he could just show himself. Why go through so much trouble? If he didn't want to reveal his true body, he could also not come out or use other methods to hide. In short, there were many methods. But in the end, he chose such a troublesome method. Chu Luiwei had a guess in her heart. Maybe the other party had no choice but to do this? But this point couldn't be verified for the time being. She looked in that direction again. Finally, that person spoke. The voice was low and hoarse, and it was difficult to distinguish whether it was a man or a woman, as if it came from an extremely distant time and space. "Emperor, please." Hearing this voice, Chu Luiwei's heart trembled. Because this voice was exactly the same as the voice of the owner of the eye that appeared in the Red Moon Desert. This was clearly, it was the same person. For a moment, countless scenes of the past appeared in Chu Luiwei's mind. The eye in the Red Moon Desert, the hand under Thousand Wine Mountain, but it turned out that they all belonged to the divine master of the illusory god palace. Debeo and the others had been trapped in the Red Moon Desert for 10,000 years, so they definitely knew about this. So he was Rong Xiu. Since he was the emperor, how could he not know about this? But he had never mentioned it before. He had even concealed it until now. Chu Luiwei's mind was in a mess. At that instant, footsteps could be heard coming from outside the hall. The entire illusory god palace fell into a deathly silence. Chu Luiwei seemed to sense something and turned around to look. A man appeared outside the gate. His figure was tall and straight. He wore a black brocade robe with golden clouds embroidered on the cuffs. His face was pure and charming, and he was incomparably handsome. He came against the light, his might impressive. It was a face that Chu Luiwei could not be more familiar with. However, compared to the past, there were some differences. His entire body was suffused with an oppressive coldness, a dense aura of slaughter, and a pair of piercingly cold and indifferent phoenix eyes. High and mighty, unapproachable. Chu Luiwei stared blankly. He was once the person she was most familiar with, but now he was also the person she was most unfamiliar with. Mu Qinghe and the others put their hands on the left side of their chests and saluted respectfully. "Greetings, Emperor." Their voices were uniform and filled with deep respect. When everyone heard this, they finally came back to their senses and saluted one after another. "Greetings, Emperor." Everyone bowed their heads and saluted. Only Chu Luiwei remained motionless. She looked at him. It was clearly an extremely close distance, but it was as if they were separated by thousands of mountains and rivers, far and untouchable. Rong Xiu. That was her pillow. He was also the most honorable emperor who had inherited the fate of the heavenly Tao and controlled all the gods in the world. Chapter 2452. She looked at him, her gaze sweeping over his face. His eyebrows were high, his nose was straight, and his thin scarlet lips were slightly pursed. That was the face that she was most familiar with, which was engraved in her heart. However, his eyes were cold, noble, and murderous. They were as cold and distant as a glacier that would never melt. That was a completely different look from what she remembered. Chu Luiwei blinked gently and curled her hands that were hanging by her side. Clearly, not long ago, this man had held her in his arms and kissed her between her eyebrows and the corner of her lips. He was full of affection. Now, he was facing her from afar, as if they had just met for the first time. For a moment, she was in a trance and did not know what was real and what was not. At this moment, Rong Xiu's gaze fell on her. She saw the color of his eyes clearly. Suddenly, she frowned slightly. She seemed to have seen Rong Xiu somewhere before. A blurry image suddenly flashed across her mind. Chu Luiwei's pupils contracted. That's right. Peach Blossom Dock. The mirror hidden in the Tao Gate world had once reflected his appearance. At that time, she only felt that the reflection of Rong Xiu in the mirror was a little different from him. At that time, he was clearly wearing a snow-white robe, but the person in the mirror was wearing a black robe. His expression was cold and murderous, which was poles apart from his usual gentle and elegant appearance. Unfortunately, she only took a quick glance at him and did not take it to heart. But now, she finally understood that the figure reflected in the mirror was not her husband, Rong Xiu, but the emperor. At this moment, Rong Xiu finally spoke. His voice was as deep and pleasant as usual, but compared to his usual gentleness, it was colder and more noble. He looked at her and said word by word, "Shengguan, come here." As soon as he finished speaking, everyone in the main hall looked at Chu Luiyue in shock. Why did the emperor suddenly call for this woman? Chu Luiyue also came back to her senses. Soon after, she frowned slightly. Shengguan? He had always called her Yu. This was the first time that Chu Luiyue heard him call her Yu. It was extremely unfamiliar. Su Li Muhong Yu, and the others were already stunned when they saw Rong Xiu walk in. When she heard him call out her name like that, she was completely stunned. What was going on? They had already guessed that the Holy Sun was an emperor. What was he trying to do now? They couldn't help but look at Chu Luiyue. The surrounding atmosphere was cold, and even the space seemed to be frozen. Then, Chu Luiyue gently exhaled and stepped forward. In the main hall, everyone's eyes were focused on her. But Chu Luiyue didn't care. She walked forward step by step and finally stood 3 steps away from Rong Xiu. Here, the extremely powerful and domineering aura around him was so oppressive that she couldn't breathe. Of course, she knew that he didn't do it on purpose. It was just because he was too powerful that he naturally exuded an astonishing aura. Chu Luiyue looked up at him slightly. Here, she could see him more clearly. But she couldn't understand. Chu Luiyue never thought that there would be a day when they would face each other. He was the person closest to her. She had entrusted her entire body, trust, love, past, and future to this man. Without hesitation, she gave him everything. She had thought that no one in this world would understand him better than she did. But now, she finally knew that wasn't the case. She was so familiar with him, but she couldn't understand him. "Emperor." She spoke softly. She seemed to be asking, but also seemed to be confirming something. Rong Xiu stared at her, his eyes deep and unfathomable. Then, he raised his arms slightly, and 4 streams of light flew out. The 4 streams of light flew past Chu Luiyue's ears and turned into 4 rings at the center of the hall. The appearance of this ring was very special because the color on it was formed by the intertwining of 2 extreme colors, gold and black. Furthermore, the patterns on the 4 rings were different from each other. There are 4 paths to choose from to ascend to the heavens and become a god. Which one will you choose? Rong Xiu asked calmly. Hearing this, many people came to a realization. So this was why the emperor had called her? Well, it was said that she was an all-rounder, and indeed had the potential to ascend to the heavens and become a god in more than one cultivation method. But the key was what she chose. Chu Luiyue didn't look back at the 4 rings. She looked at Rong Xiu, raised her chin slightly and said, "The emperor is knowledgeable. The celestial emperor is experienced and knowledgeable. You should help me choose." As soon as she finished speaking, the atmosphere in the hall suddenly became a little strange. Yu Qian and the others couldn't help but frown. What did she mean? She wanted the emperor to choose for her. Did she think she was, "Then I'll choose a mystic master"? Rong Xiu said. Chu Luiyue's lips curved. What a coincidence, I was also about to choose this. After all, I spent the most time and energy on this some time ago. Everyone only thought that she was talking about walking the path of stars. Only Shengguan Jing, Su Li, and the others knew that she was referring to the chess game that the 2 of them had played for several days. They looked at each other and tacitly kept silent. At this time, it seemed that it was better to wait and see. Rong Xiu lowered his eyes and looked at the woman in front of him. There was a smile at the corner of her lips, but her pair of bright starry eyes were calm and serious. "Since the emperor has said so, I'll choose this." As Chu Luiyue spoke, she turned around and was about to walk over. However, just as she took a step, she suddenly felt something tighten around her waist. She was stunned and looked down. Suddenly, Rong Xiu grabbed Tuan Xian's tongue that was tied to her waist. She blinked and looked up at Rong Xiu strangely. His eyelids drooped slightly, and his slender fingers gently lifted and untied the round tongue. Since we're already here, there's no need to keep this thing. Seeing this scene, Mu Qinghe's expression changed slightly. Emperor, the round tongue is something that people without a bloodline totem have to wear. It's not appropriate to take it off like this. Rong Xiu didn't say anything. He closed his fingers and put away the round tongue. Mu Qinghe tactfully swallowed the rest of her words. Yu Qian and the others also felt that this wasn't good, but the other party was the emperor after all. Moreover, what he said was right. Since they had already reached the step of ascending to the heavens and breaking through the gods, there was indeed no point in keeping that thing. Chu Luiyue looked at Rong Xiu, tilted her head, and raised the corner of her lips into an ambiguous smile. Then, she suddenly moved closer and lowered her voice so that only the two of them could hear. The emperor's technique is really becoming more and more skilled. This bundle of tongues was decapitated really quickly. Rong Xiu paused and raised his eyes slightly, looking at her dangerously. Chapter 2453. Chu Luiyue knew when to stop. She immediately turned to leave and stepped into the circle that belonged to the mystic masters. As soon as she entered, she instantly felt an indescribable pressure enveloping her. That gaze filled with warning and threat lingered on her body for a moment before finally moving away. She licked the roof of her mouth with the tip of her tongue. After a while, her red lips curled into a smile. If he wanted to act, she would just accompany him. She wanted to see what exactly he was trying to do by going through so much trouble. You have 15 minutes to make your final choice. Rong Xiu's voice broke the strange silence in the main hall. Only then did everyone recover from the previous incident and start to head towards the area that they had chosen. But there were also some people who were still full of doubts. Just now, why did the emperor's attitude towards that girl seem a little different? If he had called her over because she was an all-rounder and wanted her to choose one of the 4 paths, it would still be understandable. But that ball of tongue, couldn't he just get her to remove it herself? The emperor was noble and cold, mysterious and powerful. Even the divine envoys did not dare to get close to him. But now, how should they put it? Anyway, it was a little strange. However, when they looked at Chu Luiyue again, they saw that her expression was normal, as if she did not take what had just happened to heart. This, little Hachi looked at Chi Han and asked, "Seventh brother, should we also take this thing down?" Chi Han nodded. Little Hachi was a little happy. Her red lips curled up into a smile. "That's great. I've always felt that this thing was very cumbersome. And it's very ugly. Now I can finally remove it." As she thought, she reached out to the ball of tongue on Chi Han's waist. "Then, seventh brother, let me help you remove this thing." Anyway, they did not have the guts to ask the emperor to remove it. "Are you tired of living?" However, before she could reach out, a cold and threatening sword aura suddenly came. Swish! The ball of tongue on Chi Han's waist was instantly cut and fell. Little Eight's eyes widened slightly as he turned his head to look. Yan Qing had already walked in with a sword in his hand. He was the one who attacked just now. Little Eight didn't even have time to react before he felt a chill at his waist. Then, the ball of tongue on her body was instantly cut off. In the next moment, several balls of tongue flew towards him. Yan Qing's sword was very fast and accurate. With just one slash, all of their tongues had been cut off. Moreover, although this sword aura was to be exact, it did not hurt. Soon, he collected all the tongues of the people's tongues and handed to Rong Xiu. "Emperor!" Rong Xiu lightly waved his hand, and all the items landed in his sleeves. Quietly, he disappeared without a trace. Seeing this, everyone's the emperor's eyes is too. Anyway, it too's to Hachi's too. She scratched the air, feeling a little disappointed. Then she glared at Yan Qing. Why was he in such a hurry? Couldn't he wait for her to remove it herself? What if she was hurt by that sword? Of course, she knew that with Yan Qing's strength, he would not make such a mistake. But, didn't he see how the emperor did it? Although the emperor had lied to her master, he was still capable of doing such a thing. Chi Han glanced at Yanqing and patted little Hachi's shoulder lightly. You haven't recovered from your injury yet. Be careful later. Little Hachi pouted. Okay. Soon, all the cultivators who were waiting for the chance to ascend to the heavens and become a god had already taken their places. Swish. Rong Xiu waved his hand, and the Pantheon record appeared. Light flashed on it, and one could vaguely see the names of people on it. However, perhaps because the light was too bright, or perhaps because the pressure was too strong, people could not look directly at it. Thus, no one could see the names on it clearly. The name of the person who ascends to the heavens and becomes a god will automatically appear on the first volume of the Pantheon record. Rong Xiu said. Hearing this, everyone's heart skipped a beat. At the same time, they were faintly excited. Most of them had been waiting for this day for tens of thousands of years. Now, the moment had finally arrived. How could they not be moved? Buzz. Rong Xiu's mind moved, and a ray of light shot out from the Pantheon record. At the same time, a huge phantom suddenly appeared in the sky above the main hall of the palace of the illusory god. It was the Pantheon record. Compared to the one Rong Xiu had in the main hall, this phantom was obviously much bigger. Everyone who was waiting outside the main gate of the palace of the illusory god immediately became noisy when they saw this scene. Pantheon record. The emperor summoned the Pantheon record. Is it finally going to start? I wonder who will succeed in ascending to the heavens and becoming a god this time. It's hard to say for others, but I'm most curious about the Shangguan Yu. Do you think she can do it without a bloodline totem? I'm afraid it's hard to say. If it was before, they would definitely deny this possibility immediately. However, after experiencing so many things during this period of time, the people who had been repeatedly slapped in the face finally had experience and did not dare to make arbitrary judgments. Other than the emperor, no one else can see the names on the Pantheon record. Only when the cultivator ascends to the heavens and becomes a god will the world witness it. I wonder, who will be the first to ascend to the heavens and become a god this time? Engrave your name on the Pantheon record. Chapter 2454. Buzz. A buzzing sound rang in her ears. In the next moment, a star appeared in front of Chu Luiyue. This star flickered with a golden light and was brilliant. She was extremely familiar with the aura on it. It was Rong Xiu's power. Then, a second star, a third star. Not long after, her entire body was filled with countless starlight. There was a subtle connection between these dots of light that couldn't be ignored. Chu Luiyue looked around and quickly understood. This was a Xian formation. However, it was different from the flat Xian formations that she had seen in the past. The one that Rong Xiu executed was completely three-dimensional. Cultivators would merge into the Xian formation and coexist with it. Only by deciphering this Xian formation could she take the most important step. Chu Luiyue took a light breath. This stage, as expected, was much more difficult than expected. Even she might not be able to decipher it easily. Xiao Ran was standing not far behind her. When he saw these floating and flickering stars, he came back to his senses after a while. Damn, isn't this a trap? So difficult. How am I going to pass this? He couldn't help but sneak a glance at Chu Luiyue, only to see that she had already begun to stare at the light dots in front of her and was deep in thought. Xiao Ran was very uncomfortable. Ever since he saw the emperor's appearance, he had almost gone crazy. Who else could it be if not the man who accompanied that little girl every day? What happened to coming up from the divine ruins world? What happened to being a genius who didn't care about fame and fortune? In the blink of an eye, he became an emperor? Xiao Ran didn't want to accept this reality at first, but later on, he realized that Chu Luiyue didn't seem to know about this either. Only then did he feel better. However, the situation now was too complicated, causing him to almost lose the mood to cultivate. Just as he was thinking, Chu Luiyue had already raised her hand. A stream of divine power flew out from her fingertip and connected the two stars in front of her. Xiao Ran was secretly shocked. He couldn't help but sigh. Chu Luiyue's talent in this area was indeed not something that they could compare to. In such a short period of time, she had actually found a way to break it. Even though this was just the beginning, it was enough to show her potential. Suddenly, another slight fluctuation came from the side. Xiao Ran turned his head to take a look and was shocked to find that Qi Han had also started to make his move. Xiao Ran and the other mystic cultivators present. This master and servant pair really didn't give others a chance to live. Xiao Ran had no choice but to suppress the surging emotions in his heart. He focused his eyes and began to comprehend this Xian formation as well. At the same time, the cultivators in the other 3 regions also began their own cultivation. However, Mu Hongyu was a little special. She was not suited for any of the 4 ways. A golden stream of light flew out from Rong Xiu's palm and formed a barrier around her. Black lines crisscrossed on it. At a glance, it looked like a cage. The body of Void Yuan can break through the fence and ascend to the heavens and become a god. Rong Xiu said. Mu Hongyu nodded and looked around carefully. Then, her gaze focused as a deep shock flashed across her eyes. Because those crisscrossing black lines were actually spatial cracks caused by the collision of different spaces. The barrier that Rong Xiu cast contained extremely shocking spatial power. At a rough glance, there were at least 100 spaces compressed into this small barrier. Seeing this, Mu Hongyu sucked in a breath of cold air. Rong Xiu, as expected of an emperor. The moment he made a move, he already had such shocking strength. She clenched her fists and tried to calm herself down. Then she began to study seriously. The huge main hall of the illusory god palace fell into silence. Rong Xiu stood with his hands behind his back. No emotions could be seen on his handsome and noble face. The Pantheon record floated quietly and flickered. Time passed silently. In front of Chu Luiyue, several streams of light crisscrossed and connected the stars. Her speed was very fast. Even if Yu Qian and the others didn't like her, they had to admit that Chu Luiyue was indeed far superior to others in this aspect. If this continued, could she really ascend to the heavens and become a god? At this moment, a strong fluctuation suddenly came from behind the illusory god palace. Boom! A huge sound was heard. Everyone was shocked. Mu Qinghe was startled at first. Then, as if she suddenly thought of something, a dark light flashed across her eyes. Yu Qian, on the other hand, was delighted. Dumpling is opening her 8th meridian. He definitely wouldn't be wrong about this movement. Hearing this, the remaining divine envoys were also very surprised. They had been waiting for this day for a long time. Yu Qian couldn't hide his excitement. He cupped his fists and said to the figure hidden in the silver-red light, "Divine Master, since Dumpling has opened her 8th meridian, can you allow Yu Qian to bring her to the main palace?" After a while, the voice said, "Yes. Yes." Yu Qian's heart beat violently. He had been busy with Dumpling's matter. Now that she had finally opened her 8th meridian, the Divine Master must be very happy. This could definitely be considered a great contribution. After answering, he immediately turned and walked out of the illusory god palace, planning to bring Dumpling here. However, when he passed by Chu Luiyue, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. Then, he turned his head and looked at Chu Luiyue in disbelief. The aura on her body was also rising rapidly. This was a ridiculous and bold guess came to his mind. Yu Qian shouted sternly, "You didn't break the contract with Dumpling?" Chapter 2455. His cold voice reverberated throughout the main hall, clearly falling into everyone's ears. Almost everyone could not hide their shock as they looked over. Chu Luiyue did not break the contract with Dumpling. How was that possible? Wasn't she forced to cut off contact with Dumpling a few months ago? And it seemed like Yu Qian was the one in charge at that time. But now he actually said, no. Hearing this, Chu Luiyue's heart sank. Previously, they had hidden this matter extremely well, and the Yu Qian had never found out about it. But they did not expect that Dumpling's 8th meridian to undergo such a huge change in her strength, which led to this matter being exposed. Yu Qian did not say anything and immediately attacked. An astonishingly vigorous divine power suddenly flew out, heading straight for Chu Luiyue. Buzz. However, The divine power was immediately blocked when it reached the ring. The divine power of the brilliant gold and the dark black intertwined and instantly strangled it. Almost at the same time, Rong Xiu's deep and cold voice sounded, "Yu Qian, how dare you?" Yu Qian's face turned pale when he heard this. In his anger, he actually forgot that this was the power of an emperor. Wasn't he offending the emperor by acting so rashly? "Emperor, please forgive me." He immediately looked at Rong Xiu. Yu Qian didn't do it on purpose, but this Shangguan Yu is really too daring. Previously, I ordered her to break the contract with the Crimson Gold Heavenly Phoenix, but I didn't expect her to do this. That's because you're incompetent. Rong Xiu interrupted him. Every word seemed to be wrapped in a powerful aura, almost suffocating everyone. Yu Qian's heart trembled violently. It was a great humiliation to be reprimanded by the emperor in front of so many people. Most importantly, he had no way to refute it. At that time, he was indeed the one who personally supervised and watched them cancel the contract. He really thought that the matter was over. Who would have thought that Chu Luiyue would make such a move? Moreover, even after such a long time had passed since then, he still hadn't noticed anything unusual. Yu Qian felt as if he had been slapped hard in the face. His face was burning with pain. When ascending to the heavens and becoming a god, no one is allowed to interfere. Rong Xiu's expression did not change, but his voice was cold. "Violators, die." These words caused the entire main hall of the illusory god palace to fall into a deathly silence once again. Yu Qian clenched his fists, his heart burning with anxiety. If something were to happen and the divine master blamed him, he would have to bear the responsibility alone. However, the emperor had already spoken and his attitude was firm. Unless he was tired of living, he would not go against the emperor's order and forcefully attack Chu Luiyue. But could it be that they were just going to watch? Let her ascend to the heavens and become a deity? Yu Qian couldn't help but turn around and look at the divine master. However, perhaps because he was afraid of the emperor, the divine master didn't say anything. Yu Qian thought about it and gritted his teeth. "I'll go and bring her here first." With that, he turned around and left quickly. In any case, the divine master and the others were here. Even if the contract between Chu Luiyue and Dumpling hadn't been broken, there would definitely be a way when the time came. After all, Dumpling was too important to the divine master now. Yu Qian's figure quickly disappeared outside the door. After he left, the people in the main hall were left looking at each other. In the end, their gazes all fell on Chu Luiyue. What method did this Chu Luiyue use to deceive even Yu Qian? Shangguan Jing and the others were filled with worry. Yu Qian's reaction was huge. There was no guarantee that he would do something. Even if she could escape this calamity for now, what about after she ascended to the heavens and became a god? At that time, what she would have to face would be huge trouble. Chu Luiyue closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she had already regained her calmness. She didn't expect to be able to hide it forever. This matter would be discovered sooner or later. It was just that she had chosen an extremely delicate time. Right now, she only hoped that Dumpling would be safe and sound. It wouldn't be too late to deal with everything after she ascended to the heavens and became a god. Feng Ming Mountain. A small figure was wrapped in the scarlet gold flames. The flames burned fiercely, and the scorching heat almost caused the surrounding space to distort. Not far in front of her, the two Tian baby was swaying in the wind. Under the roasting of the scarlet gold flames, the tender green leaves seemed to become even more vibrant and rich. Dumpling's eyes were tightly shut. On her forehead, the totem of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan slowly appeared. At a certain moment, a soft sound came from her body. Finally, she suddenly opened her eyes. That pair of black grape-like eyes were already filled with brilliant flames. A vast pressure suddenly erupted from her body. 8th meridian, open. At the same time, Mao Zhen, who was standing outside the barrier of Feng Ming Mountain, sensed the commotion and frowned. She looked in the direction of Feng Ming Mountain with a complicated and unfathomable expression. "It's actually so fast," he muttered softly. In fact, after bidding farewell to Dumpling that day, although he had left Feng Ming Mountain, he had not gone far. Instead, he had been guarding this place. He originally thought that it would take a lot of time for Dumpling to open her 8th meridian. Who knew that it would actually be much earlier than expected? Standing here, separated by the barrier, it was actually impossible to see the situation inside clearly. However, that shocking fluctuation could not be concealed. Dumpling had indeed successfully opened her 8th meridian. Mao Zhen's gaze turned and looked at the myriad god record that was quietly floating above the main hall of the illusory god palace. As expected, the contract hasn't been rescinded. Inside the illusory god palace, Chu Luiyue was preparing to ascend to the heavens and become a god. On Feng Ming Mountain, Dumpling was preparing to open her meridians. Other than the fact that the contract was still there was no other possibility. Actually, he had already had this guess in his heart, but he had never had the chance to verify it. But now, he was finally certain. Those people from the illusory god palace should already know, right? Just as this thought flashed through his mind, he saw a figure hurriedly walk out of the illusory god palace, heading straight for this place. Yu Qian. Mao Zhen's heart tightened. Looking at the Yu Qian's formation, the situation seemed to be worse than he had expected. Just as he was thinking, the Yu Qian had already arrived. Seeing Mao Zhen, the Yu Qian was also shocked. However, he only frowned and did not pay much attention to Mao Zhen as he headed straight for Feng Ming Mountain. This place was under his control, so he could naturally come and go as he pleased. Mao Zhen originally wanted to exchange a few pleasantries, but seeing this scene he swallowed the rest of his words. He began to feel uneasy in his heart. Dumpling let out a long breath. After opening her 8th meridian, it was indeed very different from before. Suddenly, she paused and turned her head abruptly. Peng Yao? She spoke with some uncertainty. She pursed her lips, put her hands behind her back, and did not speak. If Hong Yao came out to apologize to her now, she would forgive it. Chapter 2456. After waiting for a while, Hong Yao still didn't come out. Dumpling pouted. I'll count to 3. If Hong Yao still didn't come out, she wouldn't talk to it anymore. At that time, even if Hong Yao came to apologize to her again, she wouldn't give it another chance. 1. There was no movement. Dumpling frowned. 2. There was still no movement. Dumpling paced back and forth, feeling very annoyed. Did Hong Yao really not care at all? What was so good about Mu Qinghe that it was so loyal to her? 2. This one. Dumpling began to count with her fingers. At this moment, she heard the sound of wind behind her. Dumpling was delighted and turned around. Ha! I knew it was you. When she saw Yu Qian who suddenly appeared in front of her, the smile on Dumpling's face froze. For a moment, she was confused and angry. Why are you here? She thought, why can't it be me? Yu Qian looked at Dumpling coldly. Dumpling sensed that something was wrong and immediately became vigilant. You didn't break the contract with Sheng Guanyu. Yu Qian said coldly and confidently. Dumpling's pupils constricted slightly. He actually knew. Come with me. Seeing Dumpling's reaction, Yu Qian became even angrier. He stepped forward and tried to grab Dumpling's hand. Dumpling immediately dodged and stared at him with hostility. What do you want to do? This person is very dangerous. Yu Qian sneered. You'll know what I want to do soon. As he spoke, a black vine as thick as a thumb suddenly flew out of his sleeve and went straight to Dumpling. Dumpling had a bad feeling and immediately retreated. At the same time, she set up a flame barrier in front of her. However, a scene that shocked her happened. The black vine directly passed through the flames. The blazing heat and tyrannical power seemed to be unable to do anything to it. What the hell is this? While Dumpling was thinking, the vine had already flown over and tightly wrapped around her wrists. This vine was very flexible and had sharp thorns on it. The moment it touched Dumpling's skin, it easily pierced through it. A sharp pain came from her wrists. Dumpling was shocked. She looked down and saw that there were drops of blood on her wrists. These drops of blood didn't fall to the ground. Instead, they were directly absorbed by the vine. A strong sense of uneasiness suddenly surged into Tuanzi's heart. She still remembered clearly all the torture she had suffered in the Red Moon Desert. This scene was all too familiar. "Let me go." Dumpling immediately began to struggle. However, this black vine was very strange. The more she struggled, the tighter it became. The blood in her body also gushed out at an even faster rate and was swallowed by it. Yu Qian snorted coldly, grabbed Dumpling, and turned around to head towards the palace of the illusory god. Dumpling, who had already opened her 8th meridian, was indeed much stronger than before. However, compared to Yu Qian, she was still slightly inferior. The two figures quickly disappeared from Fengming Mountain. A moment later, a small green shadow flashed out from behind a rock. It was Red Demon. Seeing Dumpling being taken away, it was extremely anxious. Almost without any hesitation, it flapped its wings and quickly chased after him. Mao Zhen also saw this scene. Long ago, when Yu Qian came aggressively, he already felt that something was wrong. Sure enough, not long after, Yu Qian forcefully brought Dumpling out. Yu Qian's speed was very fast, leaving only a few afterimages in the air. However, Mao Zhen's eyesight was extremely good, and he immediately saw that Dumpling's body was stained with blood. He frowned tightly. Then, his body moved and he immediately chased after her. Yu Qian did not deliberately hide his figure this time, so everyone outside the palace of the illusory god also saw him. Just as everyone was puzzled as to why he suddenly came out, they saw that Yu Qian had already brought Dumpling back. Looking at this situation, it was really not good. Isn't that the young master of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan who had been staying at Fengming Mountain? Why did the second divine envoy suddenly bring her here? Looking at the situation, it doesn't look good. She seems to be tied up. I saw it too. There seems to be blood on her body. Strange, didn't the second divine envoy always treat her very generously before? What is he planning to do now? The ancestors of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan betrayed the palace of the illusory god back then. As a sinner, how could the second divine envoy really treat her well? Judging from the commotion just now, she seems to have opened her 8th meridian? I wonder what the second divine envoy is planning to do. Everyone was discussing and making all sorts of guesses. Yu Qian had already brought Dumpling back to the main hall of the palace of the illusory god. "Let me go." Dumpling struggled the entire way, but Yu Qian was too strong and she was no match for him. When Yu Qian finally stopped, she realized that she had been brought to the main hall of the palace of the illusory god. Hearing this, Yu Qian sneered and pushed Dumpling fiercely. "Kneel down." Dumpling's hands were tied. After being pushed like this, she lost her balance and staggered, almost falling to the ground. She barely managed to stabilize her body and said angrily, "If you want to kneel, kneel by yourself." "I won't kneel." Everyone turned to look at him, including Chu Luiyue. When she saw the messy bloodstains on the little girl's body, her heart felt like it was being crushed by a heavy stone. It was stuffy and painful. "Dumpling!" She finally couldn't help but shout. Dumpling came back to her senses and hurriedly turned her head. Only then did she see Chu Luiyue standing in the middle of the golden light. "Ayu!" She didn't even think and ran towards her. However, just as she ran 2 steps, Yu Qian suddenly stopped and the black vines immediately tightened. This time, Dumpling finally fell heavily to the ground. There was a muffled sound. More and more blood began to drip from her wrist. "Yu Qian!" Chu Liyue's chest and abdomen seemed to be on fire as she shouted angrily. Yu Qian subconsciously raised his head and looked at her. Yu shouted. Just as he was about to mock her, he met Chu Liyue's eyes and his heart inexplicably trembled. At this moment, Chu Liyue seemed a little different from before. That pair of starry eyes that were always shining brightly were now bottomless black. It was as if they were covered in frost that had been frozen for thousands of years, and the coldness was bone-chilling. Just this one glance actually caused him to faintly feel a trace of fear. "Ayu, Dumpling is fine." Dumpling gritted her teeth and stood up. She looked at her with red eyes and sniffed hard. "Ayu, don't worry." She had always been extremely smart. With just a glance, she knew that Chu Luiyue was at the critical moment of ascending to heaven and becoming a god. She couldn't disturb her. Thinking of this, she revealed a big smile. I'll wait here for you to come out. Chu Luiyue's heart suddenly ached. Chapter 2457. At this moment, Yu Qian finally came back to his senses. He frowned. What the hell? At that moment, he was actually a little afraid of Chu Luiyue. She had yet to ascend to the heavens and become a god. Moreover, even if she really did become a god, she wouldn't be a match for him. After all, he had already crossed that threshold for 10,000 years. This feeling made Yu Qian very angry. He must be crazy to think that a mere Chu Luiyue could pose any threat to him. What a deep relationship between master and servant. He sneered and mocked. When he thought about how he had been deceived for so long, he was extremely angry. He couldn't wait to kill Chu Luiyue and Dumpling immediately. To think that he had repeatedly made concessions in order to make Dumpling listen to him. He thought that everything was under control, but who knew that they hadn't broken the contract from the beginning? The scenes of the past kept replaying in Yu Qian's mind, reminding him over and over again of the stupid things he had done in the past. Yu Qian was about to die of anger. Therefore, all the shock and anger at this moment turned into deep hatred. These two must pay the price for what they had done. Just as he was about to attack again, a hoarse and low voice suddenly sounded. Yu Qian, stop. Yu Qian's movements came to a halt. He took a deep breath, lifted the hem of his clothes, and knelt on the ground with one knee. Yu Qian has failed in his task. Please punish him, Divine Master. Although you couldn't break the contract with them, but at least you've opened your 8th meridian. Consider it atonement. This meant that he didn't intend to pursue Yu Qian's mistake. Yu Qian was obviously very surprised. After being stunned for a moment, he heaved a sigh of relief. Thank you, Divine Master. Come here. The Divine Master spoke again, but this time, it was obviously not directed at Yu Qian. Calling for Dumpling. Dumpling frowned, her feet seemed to be nailed to the ground, unwilling to move. She looked at the blurry figure vigilantly. Then, she suddenly remembered something and widened her eyes in shock. It's you. This person was the main culprit who had trapped and tortured her in the Red Moon Desert. Even though it was only an eye that had appeared at that time, there was no way she would be mistaken. This was the person. I said, come here. There was a trace of coldness in that person's voice. Then, before Tuanzi could react, the figure suddenly raised his hand. Following this action, the black vines that were tightly wrapped around Dumpling quickly flew up. Dumpling's body was dragged forward uncontrollably. Boom! Reddish gold flames instantly ignited. However, this kind of counterattack did not have any effect at all. That person seemed to laugh. Back then, even Yi Ling was no match for me, let alone you. Dumpling was shocked. Ancestor Yi Ling had opened 9 meridians. If even he could not do it, then she began to struggle frantically. With her previous experience in the Red Moon Desert, she knew very well what awaited her if she fell into the other party's hands. Unfortunately, this bit of strength was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot in front of the other party. Dumpling clenched her teeth, but what she got in return was an even more bone-piercing and intense pain. The black vines tightened around her wrists and dragged her away, as though they were about to break her hands. At the same time, the blood in her body was continuously being devoured by that thing. The vines that were originally dark and gloomy were gradually suffused with streaks of blood-red color. It looked very strange. Chu Luiyue's heart felt as if it had been viciously twisted by something, and it was extremely painful. In front of her, a large number of stars had already connected, forming an extremely unique Xian formation. As long as it continued smoothly, she would definitely be able to ascend to the heavens and become a god. And if she stopped now, all her previous efforts would be wasted. She moved her feet. At this moment, Dumpling seemed to have sensed her thoughts and immediately shouted, "No! You don't." She looked at Chu Luiyue with reddened eyes and shook her head desperately. No one knew better than her how much you had suffered for this day. It had not been easy, it had not been easy. If she gave up now, wouldn't all the years of suffering and sufferings she had suffered in the past be in vain? She did not want this to happen. She wanted Ayu to be well. At this moment, the black vines had already extended upwards and wrapped around her arms. More and more blood flowed out from the wounds. The thick smell of blood quickly spread throughout the entire main hall. The 8th meridian is still a little lacking. The Divine Master spoke indifferently. Unfortunately, you still have a contract with her, so this is the only way. As soon as he finished speaking, the black vines instantly wrapped around Dumpling's neck. Chu Liyue's heart skipped a beat. However, at this moment, a muscular snow-white figure suddenly pounced from outside the main hall. It was Xue. In the blink of an eye, it appeared in front of Dumpling. Then, it bit toward the black vines without hesitation. "Emperor, are you trying to interfere with the private affairs of the palace of the illusory god?" The Divine Master suddenly asked. Hearing this, Chu Liyue subconsciously turned around and looked at Rong Xiu. No emotion could be seen on his noble and cold face. Then he spoke. "Xue, come back." His voice was calm and dignified. Xue paused. It was only a moment of pause, but the black rattan wrapped tightly around Tuanzi's neck in an instant. The sharp thorns cut her skin, and a drop of dark red blood instantly appeared. Digression, friendly reminder, from now until the end, there will be a lot of new information every day. Please follow the story as you see fit. Before the end, don't think of handing the author a knife. Cough. Also, regarding Rong Xiu lying to you, everyone felt that you, should be angry and should make a scene. But in reality, after knowing the existence of the 13 divine envoys, she would not do that. After all, she already knew that Rong Xiu was not the only one lying to her. Debao and the others were also lying to her. She would only be willing to be lied to if she believed. Chapter 2458. Suddenly, a tall black figure appeared in front of Dumpling. A slender and powerful hand gripped the vine tightly. Chi, the faint sound of the vine-piercing flesh could be heard. Chi, a strong force clamped down on the vine and pulled it hard. A few drops of warm blood splashed onto Dumpling's face. Her eyes suddenly widened. Zichen. At this moment, the person who appeared in front of her and forcefully grabbed the vine to prevent it from tightening around her neck was Zichen, whom she had not seen in a long time. Zichen's movements were extremely fast. He tightened the vine with one hand and quickly picked up Dumpling with the other and pulled her into his arms. Dumpling's wrist was still tightly bound by the vine. Zichen lowered his gaze and his gaze fell on her scarred wrist. A murderous look flashed across his eyes. Immediately after, a purplish gold light flashed quickly and ruthlessly cut through the vine like a sharp blade. Dumpling felt her hand loosen. The black vine binding her wrist was cut off by Zichen just like that. Zichen hugged her and retreated without hesitation. Dumpling glanced out of the corner of her eye and saw that Zichen was holding a purplish gold scale in his hand. She widened her eyes in shock. Wasn't that the scale that Debao left on Lingxiao College's roster? Purplish gold godly armor? Yu Qian and the others were shocked when they saw Zichen successfully cut off the black vine. When Yu Qian saw the item in his hand, he couldn't help but exclaim in shock. When these words were spoken, the hearts of everyone in the main hall shook. Purplish gold godly armor. Wasn't that the treasure forged by the high priest 10,000 years ago? However, the high priest was defeated in the battle back then and the purplish gold godly armor was completely destroyed along with it. How could there be a piece in the legendary three-eyed eagle's hand now? In the next moment, Yu Qian reacted almost immediately. He jerked his head back and looked at Chu Liyue. This is hers. The legendary three-eyed eagle was her contracted divine beast, so this piece of purple gold divine armor was naturally taken from her. Almost everyone looked at Chu Liyue in shock. Is she related to the high priest? You really do have it. The divine lord spoke slowly. From his tone, it seemed as if he had expected this. The hall fell into a deathly silence. Chu Liyue held his breath. Dumpling had already opened her 8th meridian. Logically speaking, her strength should have risen by quite a bit. Even so, she was still helpless against the black rattan. No matter how he thought about it, only the piece of scale left behind by Debeo had the greatest hope of resisting it. After all, he was an existence above the god level, and the purple gold divine armor was personally refined by him, so it could not be underestimated. As expected, they managed to snatch Dumpling back. But at the same time, it also exposed her relationship with Debao. Chu Lue didn't say anything, and only stared at the profound formation in front of him. He had to be fast. He had to be faster. Now that she was inside the ring, no one could disturb her as long as she didn't go out. This was the best chance. She had to complete the profound formation as soon as possible and ascend to the god level. Just as well. I'm looking for this thing. As soon as he finished speaking, the black rattan flew up again. With the sound of the air being torn apart, the vine instantly split into two and attacked Zichen and Tuanzi respectively. Zichen hugged Dumpling tightly and quickly retreated. As soon as he left, the black rattan viciously left a mark on the ground where he had been standing. Zichen's brows were tightly knitted. He had already experienced the prowess of this thing just now. He could temporarily rely on the purple gold divine armor to deal with it, but as time passed, he was afraid that, just as this thought surfaced in his mind, a heavy aura surged toward him from all directions. Zichen's chest tightened. He felt as if his entire body had sunk into a quagmire, and it was difficult for him to move. The power of a divine lord was indeed more terrifying than anyone he had met before. The black rattan vines swung down again. Zichen was about to retreat when he realized that he could no longer control his body. Even the act of raising his hand had become extremely difficult. Just as he paused for a moment, smack! A black rattan viciously whipped his right shoulder. In an instant, his flesh was torn open. This blow was extremely powerful. Even though Zichen had an extremely strong physical body, he couldn't withstand it. However, the second rattan vines followed closely behind, heading straight for Dumpling. Zichen's expression turned serious. Since he couldn't avoid it, he chose to block it with his arm. Blood gushed out, and one could even vaguely see the ghastly white bones. Zichen! Dumpling panicked when she saw this. Previously, Zichen had been severely injured in order to save her, and it took him a long time to recover. She didn't want the same thing to happen again. Zichen, put me down. Dumpling struggled to jump down. They want to kill me. I don't want to implicate you. Zichen pursed his thin lips and hugged her even tighter. The two sides were in a stalemate. Drip, drip. Droplets of blood dripped onto the ground and soon dyed it red. Beside them, Shue was scratching its ears and cheeks anxiously when it saw this scene. It looked at Rong Xiu for help, its claws scratching restlessly. Its ice-blue eyes were filled with worry and anxiety. Was he really not going to help? Even if Zichen had the purple gold divine armor, he was definitely not that person's match. And Dumpling, at this moment, the black rattan vines swept over again. Suddenly, a barrier appeared in front of Zichen and Shue. Wait! Everyone turned around and saw that the person was none other than Mao Zhen. Digression. At around 6:30 p.m. Chapter 2459. Mao Zhen hurried over. Due to his special status, he could enter and leave as he pleased. However, he had never stepped into the Illusion God Palace ever since he arrived. This was the first time. No one expected that he would suddenly appear at a time like this. Clan leader Mao Zhen? What do you mean by this? Are you helping them? Yu Qian snorted and questioned Mao Zhen when he saw him. Mao Zhen stepped forward and quickly scanned the hall, taking in everything that was happening in the hall. When he saw Zichen and Dumpling's injured state, he frowned slightly. However, he quickly regained his composure. Second Divine Envoy, you've misunderstood. I'm here for the Divine Master. Yu Qian narrowed his eyes. The Divine Master seemed interested. Oh, what do you mean? Mao Zhen looked up and quickly glanced forward. The Divine Master's figure and appearance were blurry and difficult to distinguish. However, he was certain that he was the person who had appeared in the Red Moon Desert. How could he have known that the person was the Divine Master of the Illusion God Palace? Rong Xiu. Mao Zhen took a deep breath and suppressed the confusion in his heart. Dumpling has already opened her 8th meridian and is only one step away from opening her 9th meridian. It would be a pity if she died here. The Divine Master should also hope that Dumpling can open her 9th meridian, right? There was no doubt about that. Otherwise, the incident in the Red Moon Desert wouldn't have happened. However, he didn't know why the Divine Master was so anxious. Dumpling had the purest bloodline. As long as everything went smoothly, it was only a matter of time before she opened her 9th meridian. Why did he have to resort to such drastic measures? She has a contract with Shengguan Yu, so I must kill her. The Divine Master's voice sounded regretful, but more than that, it was filled with murderous intent. Back then, Yi Ling betrayed the Illusion God Palace and implicated the entire Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan. Now, I've given her a chance because of her purest bloodline. Unfortunately, she didn't cherish it. Besides, Mao Zhen, don't forget how the ancestor of the great Phoenix Dragon tribe died. Now that you're speaking up for her, aren't you afraid of letting Mao Yu down? Mao Zhen's heart trembled. Many emotions welled up in his heart. He looked at Dumpling with a complicated expression. Sensing his gaze, Dumpling looked at him blankly. Could it be that the death of the great Void Phoenix Dragon race's ancestor was also related to what happened to the ancestor back then? After a long time, Mao Zhen finally sighed and didn't speak any further. Of course, he had come here to save Tuanzi and Zichen. On the one hand, they were both Chu Liyue's contracted magical beasts, and he still owed Chu Liyue a favor. On the other hand, he himself was very fond of these two. He really couldn't just sit by and watch them get killed. Dumpling suddenly said, "Grandpa Mao Zhen, thank you. But this is my problem, so I will take responsibility for it myself." As she spoke, she looked at Zichen and pursed her lips. "Zichen, I'm also saying this to you." Zichen frowned. Hot tears rolled down from her eyes and dripped on the back of Zichen's hand, almost burning his heart. "I want you to be fine, and I want you to be fine." Her voice was a little choked and hoarse, but it was unusually firm. With Mao Zhen here, Zichen's life could probably be saved. Yu was preparing to ascend to heaven and become a god, so she would definitely be fine. She sniffed and gently patted Zichen's shoulder. "Zichen, put me down." Zichen didn't move. Dumpling stretched out her arms, hugged his neck, and rubbed her face against his neck. "Zichen, I don't want others to get hurt for me, and I don't want others to die for me. That would make her feel even worse." Zichen's body stiffened. After a long time, he finally bent down and put her down. Dumpling stood in front of him and tugged at his sleeve. She looked up at him with red eyes and said patiently and seriously, "I will come back. During this time, you have to take good care of Yu." Zichen looked at her with a deep gaze and made a sound of acknowledgement. After thinking for a moment, he reached out and wiped the tears off her face. Dumpling let go of his hand. When she turned around again, the crying expression on her face had completely disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by an indomitable determination. She took a step forward, stared straight ahead and asked, "You want to kill me? The descendant of the sinners is stubborn and should be killed." Dumpling sneered coldly. It was just an excuse. Anyway, she didn't believe that her ancestors would betray their masters. Only the people back then knew the truth. What happened later was just a rumor. "It's not impossible for you to kill me, but before that, I have a question." She clenched her fists and stared at the blurry figure in front of her. The past kept replaying in her mind. She said word by word, "Do you want to kill me, or do you want the power of my bloodline?" As soon as she finished her question, the entire hall fell into a dead silence. The Divine Master didn't answer her question and directly chose to attack. The black vines merged into one again and went straight for Dumpling. A look of determination flashed across Dumpling's eyes. Boom! A wisp of crimson gold flames suddenly ignited and covered her entire body in an instant. Screech! A clear and distant cry of the phoenix spread out from Tuanzi's body. Chapter 2460. In an instant, this phoenix cry spread far and wide between heaven and earth. The flames burned crazily, and in an instant, it had completely surrounded Dumpling into a fireball. The terrifyingly high temperature caused the surrounding space to begin to distort. A reddish-gold ancestor's golden feather floated out from it. Zichen subconsciously raised his hand and grabbed it very close to his hand. His eyes were fixed on the little person in the flames. In the next moment, Dumpling transformed into her true form and rushed out quickly. Dumpling! Chu Luiyue was shocked and quickly looked back. As far as her eyes could see, there was only the figure wrapped in the scorching reddish-gold flames and leaving quickly. Her feet moved. Just as she was about to move, an intense pain suddenly surged into her mind. It was as if something sharp was crazily stabbing into the depths of her mind. It was sharp and painful. In a daze, a blurry image seemed to appear in front of her eyes. It was also a crimson gold sky phoenix that flew up from the grand and majestic hall. At that time, the sky was dark, and only the reddish-gold flames burning around its body were brilliant, almost illuminating half of the sky. It was strong, bright, and engraved in the bones and blood. Chu Luiyue was suddenly stunned. Just when she wanted to see it more clearly, the image suddenly disappeared. It was clean and nothing was left. Only the hoarse phoenix cry was left, hovering in her ears for a long time. Her hands trembled slightly, and then her entire body stiffened and became numb. All the blood in her body seemed to have frozen at this moment. That wasn't Dumpling. Although the image only appeared for a moment, and she didn't even take a closer look, she was sure that it wasn't Dumpling. The Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan could only transform into a human when they were 100 years old. They were considered to have officially reached adulthood. However, Dumpling was still a child. Even if she returned to her true form, her figure was still smaller than an ordinary Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix. So, if it wasn't Dumpling, then who was it? Why would such an image appear in her mind? Chu Luiyue stood where he was, his expression blank and his eyes unfocused. Rong Xiu narrowed his eyes and took in the scene. He slowly clenched his hands behind his back. His phoenix eyes were deep and unfathomable. Qi Han quickly noticed that something was wrong with Chu Luiyue. "Master? Master?" He shouted twice before Chu Luiyue came back to his senses. The profound formation in front of her was on the verge of collapsing. She subconsciously raised her hand to stabilize it. Seeing this, many people thought that Chu Luiyue was worried about Dumpling, so they didn't pay too much attention to it. Qi Han frowned and felt that it was a little strange. "Master, are you all right?" Chu Luiyue lowered his eyes and shook his head. "I'm fine." When Yu Qian saw this, he couldn't help but sneer. "What? Aren't you going to chase after them? You have to know that it was you who forced her to do this." If Chu Luiyue had terminated the contract with Dumpling earlier, there wouldn't be so much trouble. They could only blame themselves for ending up in this state. Chu Luiyue closed her eyes and didn't say a word. After a while, she opened her eyes and turned around. She started to focus on studying the barrier around her. Her expression was unusually calm, as if she didn't care about anything around her. This time, not only Yu Qian, but also the people around them were dumbfounded. They couldn't help but look at each other. What did Chu Luiyue mean by this? Was she just going to let it go? On Dumpling's side, no matter what, that was her contracted magical beast. Weren't they still deeply in love with each other earlier? Why did they suddenly stop caring about each other just like that? "Yu Qian, go and bring her back," the Divine Master said. Yu Qian received the order. He immediately became energized and headed outside. The main hall fell into silence again. Everyone knew that Dumpling was probably doomed this time. Many people looked at Chu Luiyue. However, her eyes were focused and her expression was calm. They couldn't see anything. It was as if all of this really had nothing to do with her. Zichen glanced at her. His eyes were deep and his thin lips were tightly pursed. The people who were waiting outside the gate of the illusory god palace heard a clear and distant phoenix cry. They all looked up. A figure burning with golden flames rushed out of the main hall of the illusory god palace. That's the golden heavenly phoenix? Wasn't she brought back by Yu Qian? Why is she out now? Wait, she doesn't seem to be going out, but the holy chaos jade, what is she doing there? Everyone was discussing. Under countless gazes, Dumpling stopped in the air above the holy chaos jade. The flames around her were burning fiercely. The scorching temperature almost reached the outside of the illusory god palace. Yu Qian, who rushed out of the illusory god palace, saw this scene. His eyelids twitched fiercely, looking at the burning flames on the white jade pillars and then at Dumpling, who was hovering in the air. A strong sense of uneasiness surged in his heart. The flames on the white jade pillars were whoosh. The huge golden wings were like hanging clouds. When they flapped, they rolled up a gust of wind. In the next moment, the flames on the white jade pillars seemed to be summoned by a powerful force. They spread upward and went straight to Dumpling. Yu Qian was shocked. The flames were maintained by the golden heavenly phoenix's bloodline power. If Dumpling forcibly took all of its power, then the consequences would be unimaginable. The flames on the holy chaos jade burned for thousands of years without extinguishing. This was the symbol of the Divine Master's power. It was also the belief of the people in the illusory god palace. If the flames were extinguished, thinking of that terrible scene, Yu Qian felt unwell. For a long time, the divine envoys of the illusory god palace had been hiding a huge secret. And now, this secret was very likely to be exposed. If that was really the case, then all their previous efforts would be in vain. He had to stop her as soon as possible. Yu Qian didn't think and immediately flew toward Dumpling. But soon he found that this method wouldn't work. Tuanzi was burning the power of her bloodline and using this to display her strongest strength. The flames were burning fiercely. It was impossible to get close to her, not to mention other things. At the same time, the flames on the top of the white jade pillars were still rushing toward Dumpling. The flames on the pillars also gradually withered and extinguished. Everyone saw this scene. For a moment, everyone was speculating. What is that golden heavenly phoenix doing? Swallowing the flames on the holy chaos jade? Strange. Isn't that the Divine Master's divine power transformed? Why is she snatching it? That's the strangest thing. This golden heavenly phoenix has only opened her 8th meridian. Logically speaking, it's impossible for her to snatch the Divine Master's power. But now, moreover, the power in the flames seems to be moving toward her. Suddenly, a low voice came from the crowd. Since she's the young master of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan, then she should be able to summon the power of her own clansmen, right? Chapter 2461. As soon as these words were spoken, the crowd fell into a strange silence. Of course, there was no problem with these words. Although the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix was a sinful clan of the illusory god palace and was rarely mentioned in the past 10,000 years, it was still one of the two great ancient divine beasts. Everyone still had a certain understanding of it. Therefore, they were all very clear about this point. But this was precisely where the problem lay. The flames on the holy primal chaos jade were clearly the divine power of the Divine Master. When did it become the power of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan? Everyone could see that after Dumpling appeared, it was almost effortless for her to summon all the flames that contained astonishing power. This was clearly not right. Everyone stopped talking. But in their hearts, the same thought surged up. That absurd and bold possibility could even be said to be absurd. Yu Qian's heart was beating violently, as if it was going to jump out of his chest. Dumpling didn't want to live anymore, and she even planned to drag them down with her. If the flames and power on the holy primal chaos jade were all devoured and burned by her, then he clenched his teeth and suddenly made his move. A vigorous divine power flew out, transforming into an extremely sharp arrow that went straight for Dumpling. Dumpling didn't dodge. That long arrow instantly pierced through one of her wings. A line of blood spurted out. But soon, The blood quickly mixed into the flames and burned. Even that long arrow couldn't return to Yu Qian's hand. While it was still in the air, it was burned to ashes by the flames. Yu Qian's pupils shrank. Dumpling didn't even care about her own life. She wanted to burn herself, burn her feathers, flesh, and bones. In that case, what were the other external forces? She's crazy. Yu Qian was flustered and exasperated, and his face was green and white. But he didn't know that Dumpling had already made up her mind. Since the Divine Lord wanted to kill her and take the power of her bloodline, then she would not let him have his way. She would rather burn herself to death and burn all of the bloodline power that belonged to the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan in this place than leave any for them. Intense pain came from every part of his body. The feathers all over her body gradually began to turn black and curl up. A green shadow suddenly flew over from midair. However, at this moment, everyone's attention was focused on Dumpling. For a moment, no one noticed this small figure approaching. Hong Yao was not a mythological beast, so its speed was much slower than Yu Qian and Mao Zhen. In addition, it did not dare to get too close for fear of being discovered, so it was late. When it finally caught up, the scene before its eyes caused it to be stunned on the spot. It stared blankly at the figure in the air. The flames wrapped around him, burning wildly. The flames on the white jade pillar were also surging towards her. The terrifyingly high temperature made it almost impossible for people to get close. And Dumpling, who was in the middle of it, had also begun to get injured. A faint burning aura permeated the air. It seemed to be mixed with the smell of blood that could not be ignored. Yu Qian, on the other hand, was standing not far away. He was trying his best to stop Tuanzi with all kinds of methods. Wounds appeared all over her body. But her movements did not stop. Instead, it seemed to be even crazier. From afar, it looked like a reddish-gold flame burning fiercely in midair. Hong Yao's eyes flashed with a deep sense of panic. Then, almost without hesitation, it turned around and ran towards the main hall of the illusory god palace. The movement outside the main hall naturally attracted the attention of the people in the hall. Fan Yunxiao looked outside and frowned. She looked at Mu Qinghe and asked in a low voice, "First messenger, that Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix is stubborn. Now that things have come to this, it even intends to burn itself. Do you think we should also take action?" Mu Qinghe's expression did not change. At this moment, a blue shadow suddenly flew in from outside. Mu Dongyu immediately became alert. Who dares to trespass into the main hall of the illusory god palace? Before his voice died away, he had already raised his hand and was about to take action. However, at this moment, an astonishing and vast force suddenly attacked and stopped him. He turned around in shock, only to see that the person who stopped him was Mu Qinghe. First God. Before he could finish his sentence, he saw the blue sparrow stumbling in the next moment and directly bumping into Mu Qinghe. He raised his hand and caught Hong Yao. He frowned, and his face seemed to be covered with a layer of coldness. "Who allowed you to come in?" Mu Dongyu and the others were stunned when they saw this. "This is the first messenger's demon beast?" Hong Yao was restrained by him and could not move. It could only look up at him. That pair of clear and beautiful ruby-like eyes were already brimming with tears at this moment. Hearing his question, the boiling hot tears fell like pearls from a broken necklace. It bit Mu Qinghe's sleeve with all its might, stubbornly and stubbornly. "Dumpling. That's Dumpling. Why don't you save her? Didn't you like her the most in the past? Now that she's about to die, why don't you help her?" "Why?" Seeing this, Fan Yunxiao asked tentatively. "First messenger, your contracted demon beast, seems to have feelings for that Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix? Anyone could tell that it was here to plead for mercy. But what was its relationship with Dumpling? Was she worth it? Moreover, it was a little strange that it came to beg the first messenger at this time." Mu Qinghe said coldly, "The Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix is an ancient divine beast and the king of all beasts. If she chooses to burn herself, this blue sparrow will not be the only one who will mourn." As he spoke, he looked down at Hong Yao again. "If you want to save her, go ahead. Life and death are all in your hands. that you're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.